I'm 73 years old now, and my hands shake when I pour my morning coffee, but they were steady as stone the day I signed those papers, the day I sold the house. The house where my children took their first steps, where my husband kissed me goodbye every morning for 37 years before the cancer took him, where every crack in the ceiling told a story, and every floorboard sang a memory. I sold it all in 4 hours while my son was at work, and I'd do it again. I'd do it again. But let me start at the beginning, because nothing good or terrible ever happens without a long road leading to it. My name is Margaret, though everyone called me Maggie back when I was young and my hair was the color of autumn leaves instead of winter snow. I met Thomas when I was 19, at a church social where they were serving lemonade too sweet and cookies too dry, and he made me laugh so hard that lemonade came out my nose. Not the most romantic beginning, I suppose, but it was real. He had these eyes, brown like good earth, and hands that were always warm even in February. We were married 6 months later in that same church, and I wore my mother's dress taken in at the waist, and Thomas cried when he saw me, which made the old women whisper, but made me love him even more. We bought the house 3 years later. It wasn't much then, just a small 2-bedroom cottage on Maple Street with a porch that sagged on one side and wallpaper that was peeling in the corners. But Thomas looked at me in the empty living room, in that space that smelled like dust and someone else's life, and he said, "Maggie, I'm going to fill this house with love." And he did. Oh, how he did. He painted every room himself, sometimes working until midnight when his back ached and his shoulders burned, and I'd bring him sandwiches and sit on the floor beside him, and we'd talk about all the children we'd have, all the Christmases and birthdays, and ordinary Tuesdays we'd live in these rooms. Our son Michael came first, screaming his way into the world on a September morning, when the leaves were just starting to turn. I held him in the nursery Thomas had painted pale blue, with little clouds he'd stenciled on the ceiling, and I thought my heart would burst right through my chest with how much I loved this tiny creature who had my nose and Thomas's stubborn chin. 3 years later came Sarah, quiet where Michael was loud, gentle where he was rough, and our family felt complete. The house swelled with noise and life, with Saturday morning pancakes and skinned knees and bedtime stories that Thomas would act out with different voices until the children couldn't breathe for laughing. Michael was always intense. Even as a little boy, he wanted to be the best at everything, the fastest runner, the highest climber, the one with the most gold stars on the classroom chart. I'd find him sometimes at night, 7 or 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with his homework spread around him like he was commanding an army, his little face scrunched up in concentration. "Come to bed, sweetheart," I'd say, and he'd look up at me with those serious eyes and say, "Not yet, Mom. Not until it's perfect." I should have seen it then, that hunger that would never be satisfied, but he was my son and I only saw determination. I only saw a boy who would make something of himself. Sarah was different. She'd bring home wounded birds, and cry over dead flowers, and spend hours in the backyard talking to the trees like they were her friends. Thomas used to joke that she got all the softness that Michael left behind, that between the two of them they made one complete person. But Sarah never seemed to mind being soft. She'd hug me in the morning and at night, and a dozen times in between, and even when she got older, even when Michael rolled his eyes and called her a baby, she never stopped saying, "I love you," like it was the easiest thing in the world. The years went by the way they do, fast and slow at the same time, a blur of soccer games and school plays and family dinners around the table Thomas built with his own hands. Michael went to college on a full squeep business school, and he called home once a week, always brief, always busy. "That's my son," Thomas would say with pride that shone in his eyes. "He's going places." Sarah went to art school, which Michael said was a waste, and she'd come home on weekends with paint under her fingernails and stories about her professors, and this boy named David, who made her smile in a way that reminded me of how I used to smile at Thomas. Thomas died when he was 61. A tumor in his brain that came on fast and mean, stealing him piece by piece until the man in the hospital bed didn't even know my name. The last thing he said to me, the very last words while he still knew who I was, he squeezed my hand and whispered, Take care of our house, Maggie, it's full of love. Don't let anyone take that away. I held his hand until it went cold, and then I went home to our empty house and I screamed into the pillows we'd shared for 37 years until my throat was raw. Michael came to the funeral in an expensive suit with a woman named Jennifer on his arm, blonde and polished, and about as warm as a January sidewalk. He stayed for 2 days, made some calls in the yard about business deals and market fluctuations, and told me I should think about selling the house. "It's too much for you now, Mom," he said, not looking at me, checking his phone. "Too many stairs, too much upkeep. I know a realtor who could get you a good price." I told him no. I told him this was my home, that every inch of it held your father, held you and Sarah, held our life. He sighed like I was being difficult and said we'd talk about it later. Sarah stayed for 2 weeks. She took time off from her job at the gallery, and she and David, who was now her husband, slept in her old room. And every morning she made me breakfast and every night she sat with me on the porch where Thomas and I used to watch the sunset. She didn't try to fix anything or change anything. She just sat with me in my grief, held my hand the way Thomas used to, and that meant everything. The years after Thomas died were quiet. I kept the house exactly as it was, his reading glasses still on the nightstand, his jacket still hanging by the door. I knew it was probably unhealthy, what the grief counselor Michael insisted I see would call inability to move forward, but I didn't care. The house was all I had left of the life we built together. Michael visited maybe twice a year, always rushing, always with suggestions about retirement homes and condos and downsizing for your own good. Sarah came once a month, brought her 2 little girls, Emma and Rose, who would run through the house the way she and Michael once did, and for those afternoons the walls rang with life again. Then last year, Michael lost his job. Some scandal at his company, something about insider trading that he swore he wasn't involved in but that cost him everything anyway. Jennifer left him. His big house in the suburbs got foreclosed, and suddenly my son, my successful, self-made son who had looked at me with pity for years, who had made it very clear that he had evolved beyond his humble beginnings, needed a place to stay. "Just temporarily, Mom," he said on the phone, his voice carrying an edge of desperation I'd never heard before. "Just until I get back on my feet. 6 months, maybe less." What could I say? He was my son, the boy whose diapers I changed and whose nightmares I chased away and whose scraped knees I kissed better. Of course, I told him, "Come home," and he did, moving into his old bedroom with 3 suitcases and a bitterness that settled over the house like fog. At first it wasn't so bad. He'd help around the house, fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen, trim the hedges Thomas used to tend. He'd sit with me after dinner sometimes and we'd watch television together, not talking much but sharing space, and I let myself believe that maybe something good had come from his troubles, that maybe I'd gotten my son back. But 6 months turned into 8, then 10, then a year. Michael couldn't find work, or wouldn't, I was never quite sure which. He spent his days on his computer, applying to jobs he said were beneath him, taking phone calls that ended with him slamming doors. He started making comments about the house, little digs at first. "This place is falling apart, Mom. Look at that water stain, that's going to cost thousands to fix." Or, "You know property taxes on a place this size must be killing you. Wouldn't you be happier somewhere smaller?" I'd smile and change the subject, but the comments kept coming, growing sharper, more insistent. Sarah noticed during one of her visits. We were in the kitchen making cookies with the girls, and Michael walked through, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and muttered something about people who refuse to face reality. After he left, Sarah looked at me with worried eyes and said, "Mom, is everything okay? Is Michael bothering you?" I lied and said everything was fine. I don't know why I lied. Maybe I was ashamed. Maybe I didn't want to admit that the son I'd raised, the boy I'd loved so fiercely, was making me feel like a stranger in my own home. It came to a head 3 months ago on a Tuesday morning. I was making breakfast, scrambled eggs the way Thomas used to like them, and Michael came downstairs already dressed, already agitated. He sat at the table and said, "Mom, we need to talk." And my stomach dropped because nothing good ever follows those words. He told me he'd been thinking, analyzing the situation, he called it, and he'd come to a conclusion. The house was too much for me. I was getting older, more forgetful. What if I fell down the stairs? What if I left the stove on? What if? He had a solution though. I could sign the house over to him, and he'd take care of everything. He'd handle the maintenance, the bills, the worry. I could stay here of course, he assured me. This would still be my home, but legally it would be his. It just makes sense, Mom, he said, pulling out papers he'd already had drawn up. It's for your own protection. I looked at those papers, at my name typed at the bottom with a line for my signature, and something inside me cracked. No, I said, and my voice sounded strange, hard in a way it never had with my children. Michael's face changed, went red, and he said things, terrible things about how I was being selfish and stubborn and unreasonable, how I'd always favored Sarah, how I was going to end up dying alone in this falling down house, and it would be my own fault. I'm just trying to help you. He shouted and I shouted back, by taking my home, by taking the last thing I have of your father. He got very quiet then, and very cold, and he said fine. Then move out. I don't care anymore. Move out or I'll make your life so miserable you'll beg me to take this place off your hands. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Thomas. And I stared at the ceiling where we'd once seen shapes in the plaster, making up stories about dragons and castles to tell the children. And I realized that I didn't recognize my son anymore. Or maybe I'd never really known him at all. Maybe I'd been so blinded by mother's love that I'd mistaken ambition for drive, selfishness for independence, cruelty for strength. The next morning I called Sarah. I told her everything, and she cried. And then she got angry in that quiet way of hers that's somehow more frightening than any outburst. Mom, she said, you don't have to put up with this. It's your house. Make him leave. But I couldn't. He was still my son, and some part of me still hoped that he'd wake up and remember who he used to be, who we used to be. For the next 2 weeks Michael made good on his promise. He played music loud at night. He invited people over who drank and laughed, and made me feel invisible in my own living room. He accidentally threw away photos, told me the food I cooked was terrible, left messes everywhere like he was marking territory, and through it all he'd smile, this cold smile, and say things like, "Gosh, Mom, this house is really getting to be too much for you, isn't it? You seem so stressed. Maybe it's time to reconsider my offer." I was sitting on the porch one evening, in Thomas's old chair that squeaked when you rocked, and I was so tired, so bone-deep exhausted, that I actually thought about it. About signing those papers, about just giving in. And then I heard Thomas's voice as clear as if he was sitting beside me. "Don't let anyone take that away. Not the house," I realized, the love, the life we built, the proof that we existed, that we mattered, that we created something beautiful. And I knew what I had to do. I called the realtor the next morning, the one Michael had mentioned years ago, actually. I told her I wanted to sell the house and I wanted it done fast, while Michael was at work. She thought I was joking at first, but when she heard the steel in my voice, she said, "Let me make some calls." We had 3 showings that week during Michael's working hours. He'd finally gotten a job at his old company's competitor. Something he acted like was beneath him, but that got him out of the house 9 to 5. The third couple who came through, young with a baby on the way, they stood in the living room and the wife started crying. "It feels like love here," she said. "Like a family loved this house." And I told her yes we did, and I accepted their offer on the spot. The closing happened fast, cash sale, no inspection. They wanted it exactly as it was, memories and all. I arranged everything for the day Michael was at work. Sarah came to help me pack my personal things, the photos, Thomas's glasses, my mother's china, everything else, all the furniture, all the dishes, the beds and the tables and the chairs, it all went with the house. I didn't want any of it. It belonged here, rooted in these rooms, part of the structure itself. I left a note for Michael on the kitchen counter, on the table Thomas built. "Michael," I wrote, and my hand shook but my heart was steady. "You told me to move out. So I did. I sold the house. The new owners take possession tomorrow. Your things are in the garage. I'm staying with Sarah. I loved you with everything I had. I still do. But I will not let you destroy what your father and I built, what we believed in, what we were. This house was full of love. You forgot that. I never will. Mom, I walked out at 3 o'clock, gave my keys to the realtor, and didn't look back. Sarah was waiting in her car, and we drove away from Maple Street, from the house that had held my entire adult life, and I cried, but they weren't sad tears, not exactly. They were complicated tears, the kind that come when something ends and something else begins, and you don't quite know which one to mourn. Michael called that evening. Screamed actually, so loud that Sarah could hear him through the phone. He called me vindictive, spiteful, cruel, every ugly word he could think of. He threatened to sue me, to contest the sale, to have me declared mentally incompetent. I let him rage until he ran out of steam, and then I said very quietly, "It was my house, Michael. Mine and your father's. You wanted me gone, so I left. I just took the house with me, and I hung up." That was 6 months ago. I haven't heard from Michael since. Sarah says he's doing fine, got promoted actually, found a new girlfriend, moved to another city. She says maybe someday he'll understand, maybe someday he'll apologize. I don't know if he will. I don't know if it matters anymore. The young couple sent me a letter last month with a photo of their baby girl in the nursery that Thomas painted. Under those clouds he stenciled with so much love. They told me they can feel the happiness in the walls, that their daughter sleeps better in that room than anywhere else, that they're honored to raise their family in a house that knew such love. I keep that letter in my pocket, folded and refolded until the creases are soft as cloth. I'm living with Sarah and David now, in their guest room that Sarah painted my favorite shade of yellow, and Emma and Rose knock on my door every morning asking if I'll make them pancakes or read them stories, or teach them how to hem a dress the way my mother taught me. It's not my house on Maple Street. It's not the life I thought I'd have in my 70s. But it's full of love, the way Thomas promised our house would be, the way I promised him it always would be. Sometimes I dream about the house. I walk through those rooms and Thomas is there, young again with paint in his hair, and Michael is small and serious with his homework, and Sarah is bringing me dandelions from the yard like they're made of gold, and in the dream the house is endless, room after room of memories, and I know I could walk forever, and never reach the end of all the love we put into those walls. Then I wake up and Sarah is knocking softly, asking if I want tea, and her voice is so much like mine when I was young that sometimes I forget where I end and she begins. I'm 73 years old, and I sold the house where I thought I'd die, where I planned to take my last breath in the bed where Thomas took his. I broke my own heart to save it. And on the hardest days, when I wonder if I did the right thing, when I miss those walls and those floors, and those rooms so much I can barely breathe, I remember that love isn't about the place. It's about what you're willing to protect, what you're willing to lose, what you're willing to sacrifice to keep the sacred things sacred. I saved that house from becoming a weapon. I saved our memories from being used as leverage. I saved the love Thomas and I built from being twisted into something ugly and unrecognizable. Michael got what he wanted in the end. He wanted me out of that house. And I got what I needed. I got to leave on my own terms, to choose love over fear, to protect what mattered most. The house is still standing on Maple Street. There's a tire swing in the backyard now, and new curtains in the windows, and smoke coming from the chimney on cold mornings. It's alive again, the way it was when we were young and the children were small and every day felt like a gift we hadn't earned, but received anyway with grateful, trembling hands. And me, I'm here, in Sarah's yellow guest room, with my daughter's laugh floating up the stairs and my granddaughter's footsteps thundering through the halls, and I'm learning that home was never the house at all. It was always just love, stubborn and fierce and willing to burn down everything to stay pure. Thomas knew that. He told me to protect it, and I did, even if it broke me, even if it cost me my son, even if I have to carry this ache in my chest for the rest of my days. I did exactly what he asked. I kept the love safe. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope to do.